And at 6 o'clock tonight, Paris time, it'll be on. 40,000 plus attendees, a former aircraft hangar in northeast of Paris. We're told apparently that a large chunk of Australian big business will be cheering them on. This is the 21st conference. Well, it was global warming once, now it's called climate change because the globe doesn't warm. COP21, the Conference of the Parties. And we're told that a groundswell has built up across the business community. All I can say to that is it wouldn't be the first time the business community were easily duped and fell into line. I wonder who's bearing the cost of all of this. Well, we know the answer, don't we? Business will incur the cost and they'll pass it on to you, the consumer. As Terry McCrann has said many times to me on this program, this whole decarbonisation of the economy is a national suicide note. To anyone with half a brain, this must be unbelievable in the strict sense of the word. We're talking about carbon dioxide. Of all the air in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is 0.04%. And human beings produce only 3% of that. That's 3% of 0.04%. And Australia produces 1% of the 3% of the 0.04%. Here at home, to deal with that extraordinary problem, we have a renewable energy target that will cost us $22 billion by 2020. Direct action by the Abbott government has already cost us $660 million. How much are we going to sign up to in Paris? Who knows? The extraordinary aspect of this, or one of them, is that almost every person at this conference will be singing off the same sheet of music. This is science, allegedly, and there's not one sniff of disagreement. And so there's an open letter published last week by the CEOs of 78 companies with operations in 150 countries, and it's signed by the heads of the companies calling for bold action, quote, to secure a more prosperous, isn't that a lovely word, world for us all. And so in one piece I read at the weekend, quote, limiting global warming to 2 degrees, a level widely seen as avoiding the worst of the impacts of climate change, and a key goal for some at the Paris talks means no new coal mines will be needed. Oil demand will peak near the end of the decade and growth in gas demand will disappoint. These people are on another planet. Even Malcolm Turnbull has conceded that coal will be the principal source of energy for years to come, and it will be. Now, as you've heard me say, I'm not opposed to coal mining. I am opposed to coal mining which plunders prime agricultural land. But the propaganda is extraordinary. They're marching, we're told, in the streets, thousands of them. Although, as Janice Kelly from Charters Towers wrote to the papers today, thousands gather for climate march. She said, let's not forget the millions of us who didn't. If you ask these people marching the difference between carbon and carbon dioxide, they couldn't tell you. If you ask them how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere that's causing all this problem, they couldn't tell you. Just imagine all this cost when carbon dioxide is 0.04% of all the air in the atmosphere. China, India and Russia couldn't care about any of this. Global temperatures haven't risen for 20 years. And I'm sorry, you'd have to be absolutely dumb to demonise coal-fired power on the basis of some hoax about global warming and embrace expensive renewable energy power which forces you to pay more and, of course, forces manufacturing out of business. And I'm sorry, jobs are being lost everywhere. In 2013, BlueScope Steel in Victoria lost 170 jobs, Boral 790, Penrice Soda in South Australia 60, Pentair, a company that made steel pipes in Sydney for 60 years, closed, 160 jobs, Amcor 300, Goodman Fielder shut down factories, 600 jobs, Caltex gets rid of the Kurnell refinery, 330 jobs, and the Australian Food and Grocery Council said in 2013 more than 300 businesses went overseas or out of business because of high energy costs. But Canberra's going to spend $17,000 million erecting between 7,000 and 10,000 wind turbines, and will subsidise them with your money. Germany are pushing ahead with new coal-fired electricity plants because political and public concern is increasing over the cost of energy. You might remember I recently spoke to Dr. Alan Watts, a distinguished medical researcher, who told us often that the wind industry propaganda, his words, flatters the gullible and exploits the well-intentioned. I mean, the rubbish that is promulgated on all of this is beyond belief. Many of you have written to me to remind me of some comments made by Lord Monckton in October last year. He's warned over and over again about this. This is what he said.
When Sir David King, William Hague's climate change ambassador for the United Kingdom, he was asked whether all the nations of the world were now in principle ready to sign their people's rights away in such a treaty. And he said, oh yes, but there are two standouts. One is Canada, and the other holdout was Australia. And Australia he can't do anything about because Tony Abbott is in office until after the December 2015 conference. So that means you all, first of all, need to guard Tony Abbott's back, because the Turnbull faction, in conjunction with the UN, will be doing their absolute level best to remove your elected Prime Minister from office before the end of his term, and in particular before December 2015. They do not want any standouts. So look after him.
Lord Monckton's on the line from Edinburgh. Christopher Monckton, good morning.
Well, how lovely to hear you, Alan, and my goodness, anybody listening to your show and listening to that impeccably researched introduction must realise that they are listening to one of the great radio news hosts on the planet today. I do congratulate you.
I'm very grateful for that, but what concerns me here is that you can't get any debate on any of this, can you?
Well, no, increasingly you can't, because the other side are terrified of debating with us on this at all. And increasingly what they're demanding instead, and indeed something like 27% of all so-called Democrats in the United States, for instance, are now demanding that anyone who, like you and me, dares to raise any questions at all about the Climate Communist Party line on any of this, that we should be prosecuted and sent to jail merely for asking questions.
Yeah.
And that's because they know they've lost.
Yes, indeed.
They know, factually speaking, that there is no basis for this anymore. They've understood exactly what you've said about no global warming now for a couple of decades. It's simply zero, at least for 18 years, 9 months, according to the RSS satellite data set. It just isn't happening. Remember, I showed that graph on your TV show last year, and now it's another year has gone by, and another year with no global warming.
But when the global warming stopped, did anyone ask why the settled science wasn't working? I mean, these people don't even differentiate between carbon and carbon dioxide.
No, we're dealing with a level of medieval scientific illiteracy. I mean, the fact that they're proposing to build however many thousand it is of these windmills, I mean, that's 14th century technology to address a 21st century non-problem. It's mad, all of this. And of course, they haven't asked any of the right questions. Normally, in science, if you make a prediction, as they did in 1990, that by now there should have been 3/4 of a Celsius degree of global warming, and there hasn't been much more than 1/4 of a Celsius degree, then, you know, that's a failed forecast. We've only had 1/3 of the warming that was their central estimate, made with substantial confidence. Those were their words. The UN's climate panel back in 1990, they screwed up. They got it wrong. Has there been any review of this? Well, yes, interestingly, there has. The UN's climate panel is now saying, oops, we can't go on making these forecasts of extreme amounts of warming when it isn't happening. So they have all but halved the amount of warming they're now predicting will happen over the next 35 years. But again, it's already apparent, because the rate of warming has been slowing down a lot, and now it's stopped altogether in the last 20 years, that even those new forecasts are exaggerations. And on the very latest computer estimates, which they didn't dare publish in their main report 2 years ago on their assessment of the climate, they are now privately only expecting half a Celsius degree of global warming, even if we do no more about this for the rest of this century. They're only expecting half a degree of global warming to happen, but they're not saying that. They're pretending we're going to get somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees, when their own figures, their own methods of calculation are telling them it's only half a degree.
Yes, I mean, they hate it.
I'm going to tell you what this is, Alan. Yeah. That is criminal fraud.
Right.
It
is fraud. It is fraud. I've said this before, and they hate you saying this, but at the height of his powers...
do about it.
At the height of his powers...
I've been approached by the International Geoethics Committee, which is a group of very eminent professors from all around the world who have got together to say we can no longer have the earth sciences, which is where climate science comes in, we can no longer have the earth sciences corrupted by these people, and the only way to stop them is to get the public authorities to do fraud investigations. But effectively, we're going to have to do the work for them. And they've asked me to head up a fraud investigation team, which is going to very quietly research those elements of what has been going on that are fraud. And we've identified three main categories. First, the idea that there is a consensus, when in fact the number of papers out of nearly 12,000 that have been written on climate over the last 21 years that actually said even that little statement that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us, only 41 papers out of 12,000 said that, 0.3%. And that was misrepresented by the people who wrote that paper as 97.1%. That is fraud. And it's already been identified by one of the police forces in Australia as being a deception. They haven't yet quite got to the point where they're willing to prosecute. We're working on that at the moment. But they have accepted that a deception is the basis for this claim of so-called consensus, on the basis of which this entire conference is happening. There are two other main areas of fraud. One is this business of them saying they're expecting 2 to 4 degrees Celsius of warming this century, when on their own figures, we know they're only expecting half a Celsius degree, and they're trying to hide that. And that's a very serious fraud, because it's again trying to say there's a problem when they know from their own mathematics that there isn't. And then the third fraud, which is gradually being exposed now by The Economist, is that they know perfectly well that it costs between 10 and 1,000 times more to make global warming go away by taking steps in mitigation today, like building windmills and useless solar panels and so forth, than it is to let the warming happen and pay the cost of adapting to it later. So enormous economic damage is being done. They know this, and yet they are pretending that it is economically worthwhile to take the steps that all these big businessmen you were talking of are advocating. Now, those are the three areas in which we see real evidence of fraud, and we are quietly, we're not going to name names, certainly not on your show, don't worry, you're not going to have legal writs from everybody. What we are going to do is we're quietly going to research these frauds. We're not going to make publications about this. We're not going to go public. We're quietly going to assemble dossier that will then be reviewed by the steering committee of the International Geoethics Committee, and that committee will then decide whether or not we in the fraud investigation team have made out a case they think should be referred to the police, and they, using their authorities as professors and doctors of the relevant earth sciences, will then complain to the police authorities in the countries concerned, and they will say, we are staking our scientific reputations on saying that we think there is a fraud here, and we now require you to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute.
Good on
and
you.
I think that's the only way we're
Only
now
way
going
to
to
go.
stop this nonsense.
Good to talk to you. It's always good to talk to you, and I really thank you for your time, Christopher Monckton. Much appreciated.
It's been great to be with you, Alan.
There we are, Lord Monckton speaking to us from Edinburgh.